When the letter arrived, I almost didn't open it. It had been years since anyone in my family wrote to me, and the handwriting on the envelope stopped me cold. I knew it right away. It was my son's. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at it for what felt like forever. The same table where I used to pack his school lunches, where I'd waited up for him when he came home late from football practice. Now it looked too big, too clean, too empty. The sound of the rain outside filled the silence. It was a soft, steady rain, the kind that makes you remember things you tried to forget. I traced my finger over his name. Daniel, I whispered it like a prayer. I hadn't said his name out loud in years. There was a time when my house was full of laughter, when my son and daughter would argue over who got the last pancake, and my husband would read the newspaper while pretending not to listen. We weren't perfect, but we were close until we weren't. I still remember the day everything changed. One argument, one misunderstanding, words that came out sharper than they should have, a door that closed and never opened again. For years I told myself it wasn't my fault, that they'd understand one day, that time would soften things. But time has a way of hardening silence. Days turned into months, months into years. Birthdays came and went. Photos stopped arriving. My daughter got married without me there. So when that letter came, plain white envelope, no return address, I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to tear it open and hold on to every word. Another part of me was terrified it would only hurt more. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The paper felt heavier than it should. Maybe it wasn't from Daniel. Maybe it was from someone else. Maybe it was a mistake. But deep down, I knew. It was him. And for the first time in years, I whispered into the quiet, "Please, let this be a way back." The rain kept falling outside, tapping softly against the window. The house smelled faintly of coffee and old memories. I reached for a knife, slid open the envelope, and began to read. Before everything fell apart, my mornings used to start the same way. I'd wake up just before sunrise, the smell of coffee already filling the kitchen. My husband, Mark, was always an early riser. He said the quiet before dawn helped him think. Sometimes I'd find him sitting at the table with his glasses low on his nose, reading the news, a half-smile playing on his face when he saw me. "Morning." "Sweetheart," he'd say, without looking up, and I'd smile back, half asleep, half happy. Those were the ordinary moments that stitched our family together. Small, quiet things that never seemed important until they were gone. Our son, Daniel, was always the first one to wake after us. He was 17 then, tall, kind, and a little stubborn like his father. He loved fixing things. Radios, bikes, old computers, anything broken fascinated him. "Mom," he'd say, his voice full of that youthful certainty, "nothing's really broken. You just have to understand it." I'd laugh and tell him that life didn't work that way. Maybe that was where he got his hopefulness, that belief that everything could be fixed, if only you tried hard enough. Then there was Emily, our youngest. She was 15, with that kind of spirit that made a room brighter. She loved art, always painting or sketching something. The sky, the cat, her brother's face while he was napping. She'd stick her drawings all over the fridge until there was no space left. I used to tease her about it. "You're going to run out of fridge before you run out of ideas. Sweetie." She'd giggle and hug me from behind. Sometimes she still felt like my little girl. Even when she pretended to be all grown up, we weren't a perfect family, no one is, but we were close. We talked at dinner, argued sometimes, laughed often. The house felt alive. There were shoes by the door, jackets draped on chairs, music from Daniel's room, and Emily's laughter floating down the hallway. I can still hear it if I close my eyes. Mark worked at the local hardware store, and I was a part-time teacher at the elementary school. Our life wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Every Sunday, we'd drive out to the lake after church, just to sit by the water. The kids would feed the ducks, and I'd watch them through the reflection, their faces soft and free in the ripples of sunlight. I remember thinking, I hope it always stays like this. But life doesn't ask what you hope for. It just moves, gently at first and then all at once. Looking back, I think the first crack appeared the year Daniel turned 18. He'd been accepted to a college across the state. And though I was proud, I was terrified too. He was my first baby, the one I used to hold against my chest when the world felt too big. I didn't know how to let go. Mark told me, "You've got to let him find his way, Maggie." I tried. I really did, but I couldn't stop worrying. Every call that went unanswered, every weekend he said he was too busy to come home. It cut a little deeper. Then there was the argument, the one that started small but grew like wildfire. It was over something simple, like most big fights are. Money, responsibilities, timing, it doesn't really matter now. What matters is how I made him feel. He thought I didn't believe in him. I thought he didn't respect me. Two people, both loving each other, both too proud to listen. Mark tried to calm things down, but by then I was already crying, and Daniel had already raised his voice. Emily sat in the corner, silent, hugging her knees. I remember the look on Daniel's face when he said, "Mom, you never trust me. You always think I'll mess up." I wanted to say I was scared. Not of him failing, but of losing him. But the words got stuck behind my pride. So instead, I said something I didn't mean, something that still echoes in my mind. "If you walk out that door, don't expect me to be waiting." And he walked out, just like that, a door closed, and everything I knew about being a mother changed. For weeks, I waited for him to come back. I called. I left messages. Sometimes Emily would text him, but the replies were short, distant. Then one day, the calls stopped going through. His number changed. I told myself he just needed time. But time stretched into years. Mark tried to stay strong for me, but I could see the sadness in his eyes. He missed our son too, but he dealt with pain quietly. The kind of quiet that filled the house like dust, settling on everything. Emily grew up faster than she should have. She stopped talking about her brother. She poured her heart into her art and into her studies. And when she went to college, she left behind her laughter too. The house became quieter, lonelier. I filled the silence with routine, cleaning, gardening, teaching, but nothing filled the space where my family used to be. Sometimes at night, I'd stand by Daniel's old room. Everything was still the same, his trophies on the shelf, his posters fading on the wall. I couldn't bring myself to change anything. It felt like if I did, he'd really be gone. Years passed like that. Then one morning, I woke up to find Mark sitting at the kitchen table again, his hands shaking slightly as he folded a piece of paper. It was a letter. Not from Daniel, but from Emily. She wrote that she was getting married, and she didn't want me there. She said it kindly, but the words still hurt. She wrote that it would be too hard for Daniel, that maybe someday things could be different, but not yet. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, staring at the paper, the same way I would years later when Daniel's letter finally came. Mark reached over and held my hand. "Give them time," he said softly, but time, I'd learned, only gives distance room to grow. Still, I never stopped hoping. Every birthday, I'd bake a small cake. I'd light a candle, close my eyes, and whisper his name. Daniel. It was my way of keeping him close, even when he was far away. I didn't know it then, but somewhere out there, my son was writing a letter that would find its way home, a letter that would change everything. The years after Emily's wedding were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. It's strange how a house can stay the same while everything inside you changes. The walls were still painted the same soft cream color, the clock still ticked above the refrigerator, and the old oak table still sat by the window. But the laughter, the sound that made this house a home, was gone. I used to wake up expecting to hear someone's voice. Daniel's music, Emily's laughter, even Mark's gentle hum as he read the paper. But mornings became quiet, the kind of quiet that hums like a memory you can't turn off. Mark still tried to keep things normal. He'd say, "Let's take a walk," or "Let's go out for dinner." But the truth was, everything reminded me of them. The diner we used to go to, the park where Daniel learned to ride his bike, the grocery store where Emily picked out her favorite cereal, so I started staying home more. The house became both my comfort and my punishment. I still kept their rooms the same. Emily's walls were covered with her drawings, little bits of her imagination frozen in time. Daniel's trophies still shone faintly in the afternoon light. I dusted them every Sunday, even though no one saw them but me. It felt like keeping those things clean meant keeping them close. Mark tried not to show it, but I knew he missed them too. Sometimes at night, I'd find him sitting in Daniel's room, his hand resting on the back of the chair, staring at the old photo of our family at the lake. He never said anything about it. He didn't have to. One evening, about a year after Emily's wedding, I found an old voicemail on my phone. It was from Daniel. It wasn't new. It was years old, from right before the fight. I must have saved it without realizing. His voice was younger, lighter. "Hey, Mom. Just calling to say I got the part-time job. Don't worry, I'll manage classes too. Love you." I listened to that message over and over. It felt like a tiny piece of him was still here, caught in time. After that, I started writing letters. Not to send, just to write. Every month I'd sit at the table and write to Daniel and Emily, little updates about my life, about the garden, about how much I missed them. Sometimes I'd tell them about the weather, or what I made for dinner, as if they'd read it and picture home. I kept the letters in a box under my bed. By the time 5 years passed, there were dozens of them, all addressed but never mailed. Then, one day, Mark got sick. It started small, just fatigue and a cough. But it grew worse quickly. We spent months going in and out of hospitals. I tried to stay strong, but every time I saw him in that hospital bed, I felt the weight of everything we'd lost. He never complained. Not once. Even when the pain got worse, he'd smile at me and say, "We've had a good life, Maggie. Don't forget that." I'd hold his hand and nod, even though my heart felt like it was breaking. One night, when it was just the two of us, he said something I'll never forget. "Promise me something," he whispered. "Anything," I said. "When I'm gone, don't stop writing to them. One day they'll come back, and when they do, you'll want them to know you never gave up." He passed away that winter. It was snowing that morning, soft, white flakes falling against the window. The world looked peaceful, like it was holding its breath. After the funeral, the house felt emptier than ever. I tried to stay busy. I started teaching again, just a few hours a week. The children's laughter in the classroom helped a little. It reminded me of Daniel and Emily when they were small, curious, innocent, full of life. But nights were the hardest. That's when memories came back like echoes. Sometimes I'd dream of the kids as they were, Daniel laughing as he chased Emily around the yard, both of them collapsing into the grass, breathless and happy. I'd wake up reaching for them, only to find silence. About a year after Mark's passing, I decided to try reaching out again. I wrote to Emily first. It wasn't easy. I must have rewritten that letter a dozen times before I finally sent it. I told her I understood why she didn't invite me to the wedding. I told her I wasn't angry, that I only hoped she was happy. I told her I missed her every single day. Weeks went by. Then months. No reply. I tried calling. Her number went straight to voicemail. I left one message. "Hi, sweetheart. It's Mom. I don't want to bother you. I just wanted to hear your voice." That's all? I never heard back. It would be easy to say I lost hope after that, but I didn't. Hope, I've learned, isn't loud. It doesn't shout or demand. It's quiet. It waits. It whispers, "Maybe tomorrow." I started writing to Daniel again. More than ever, actually. I told him about Mark, about how proud we were of him, even when things went wrong. I told him that forgiveness wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about love surviving, even when people couldn't find their way back to each other yet. Sometimes I'd walk to the post office, stand there with one of those letters in my hand and imagine mailing it. But I never did. I didn't even know where he lived anymore. Then, one spring afternoon, I met someone who changed everything, without even knowing it. Her name was Linda. She was a substitute teacher who joined our school for a few months. Kind, cheerful, with that easy warmth people either have or don't. We became friends over coffee breaks and shared lunches. One day she asked me if I had children. For a moment, I didn't know how to answer. I smiled and said, "Yes, 2. She asked about them, where they lived, what they did. And I told her the truth quietly, that we hadn't spoken in years. Linda didn't pity me. She just listened. And then she said something simple. Sometimes, people need space to grow before they can reach back. That sentence stayed with me. Maybe my children weren't gone. Maybe they were just growing. Finding their way, like Daniel used to say about fixing broken things. A few months later, Linda invited me to her family's 4th of July barbecue. I almost said no, but she insisted. It was the first time in years I'd been surrounded by families again. Laughter, food, kids running around. It felt strange at first, but comforting too. When I got home that night, I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot I used to write my letters, and for the first time, I didn't cry. I just sat there in the quiet and whispered, "They're out there, and maybe one day they'll come home." It wasn't much, but it was enough to help me breathe again. That fall, I decided to take a short trip. I drove to the lake we used to visit every Sunday. The trees had turned orange and gold, and the air smelled like pine and memory. I brought a blanket and a notebook, sat by the water, and wrote another letter. It started the same way as always. "Dear Daniel, I hope you're doing okay." I watched the wind carry a few leaves across the surface of the lake. For a moment, I imagined Daniel standing on the opposite shore, grown and strong, looking back at me with understanding in his eyes. Maybe he missed me too. Maybe he wrote letters of his own. When I got home that evening, I placed the letter in my box and closed the lid gently. The box was heavy now, not just with paper, but with years of love and waiting. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind that starts quietly and changes everything, the letter arrived. I found it in the mailbox between bills and advertisements. Plain white envelope, no return address. But I didn't need one. I knew. The moment I saw the handwriting, that familiar mix of neat and messy, my heart began to race. Daniel's handwriting. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stood on the porch, the morning air cool against my skin, the sound of birds somewhere in the distance. My hands were shaking. I whispered, "It's him." I took the envelope inside, set it gently on the table, and stared at it for what felt like forever. After all these years of silence, my son had written to me. I didn't know what the letter would say, but I knew. Whatever it was a beginning. I must have stared at that envelope for nearly an hour before I finally opened it. It sat there on the table, still damp from the morning dew, its corners slightly curled. I kept finding reasons to delay. Making tea, straightening a napkin, staring out the window. I was afraid that his words would reopen every wound I had so carefully covered over the years. But something in me whispered that maybe this was what I'd been waiting for all along. My hands trembled as I slit the envelope open. The paper inside was folded neatly, not rushed, not messy. There was something careful about it, almost tender. And when I unfolded it, the first word I saw made my breath catch. Mom. Just that. Simple. Ordinary. But to me, it felt like the world stopped moving. No one had called me that in years. I pressed the paper to my chest for a moment, then began to read. Mom, I don't really know how to start this. I've written and thrown away this letter more times than I can count. But after all these years, I think it's time. You once told me that no matter what happens, the truth always finds its way home. Maybe this is my way of finding mine. I paused there, feeling the sting of tears I didn't try to hide. His handwriting hadn't changed much, a little more careful now, but still Daniel. Still my boy. I was angry for a long time, Mom. Back then, I thought you didn't believe in me. When you told me not to leave, I thought it meant you didn't trust me to make my own choices. I didn't understand that you were scared, not of me failing, but of losing me. I see that now. I could barely breathe. My fingers tightened around the paper, my eyes following every word like they were the last drops of water in a desert I'd been wandering for years. When I left home, I told myself I didn't need anyone. I was too proud to call, too stubborn to forgive. But pride is a lonely thing. It keeps you company, but it never keeps you warm. For the first few years, I convinced myself that I was doing fine. I had friends, I had work, I had a life. But every holiday, every birthday, something felt missing. I used to look at the phone and think about calling. I even dialed once, but I hung up before you could answer. I pressed a hand over my mouth, remembering those nights I sat by the phone, praying it would ring. When Dad passed away, I wanted to come. I wanted to be there for you. I drove halfway home, but I couldn't bring myself to knock on the door. I didn't know what I'd say. I thought maybe I'd done too much damage, that you wouldn't want to see me. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I had dreamed of hearing those words for so long that I wasn't sure they were real. I set the letter down, took a deep breath, and whispered into the quiet. I never stopped wanting you here, Daniel. Then I kept reading. I saw Emily last month. We hadn't talked much either. She told me how you've been writing letters all these years. She said you never gave up on us. She said you still bake cakes for our birthdays. When she told me that, I broke down right there in the middle of the cafe. You know what she said next? She said you kept hope alive for all of us. My heart felt like it was breaking and healing at the same time. I thought of Emily, my daughter, who had stayed quiet all these years, and how she must have told him. Maybe the letter wasn't just from Daniel. Maybe it was from both of them in a way. Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just want you to know that I never stopped loving you. If you're willing, I'd like to see you. There's a park near the old lake, the one we used to visit on Sundays. I'll be there this Saturday at 3 o'clock. If you come, I'll know you still want me in your life. If not, I'll understand. Love always, Daniel. By the time I finished reading, the tears were falling freely. I sat there at the table, the letter trembling in my hands, my heart pounding in my chest, after years of silence, of unanswered prayers, of writing words I never thought he'd read. My son wanted to see me. I whispered his name like a promise. Daniel! For a moment I didn't move. The rain had started again outside, gentle and steady, as if the world was trying to wash away the years between us. Then I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the sky. I didn't need to think about whether I'd go. I already knew. The days leading up to Saturday felt longer than any I could remember. I must have read that letter 100 times, each word becoming part of me. I placed it on the nightstand beside my bed, so it would be the first thing I saw every morning and the last thing before I slept. I cleaned the house, not because I expected him to come here, but because I needed to feel ready. I cooked the meals he used to love, even though I ended up eating alone, and on Friday night, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank piece of paper in front of me. This time, I didn't write a letter I'd hide away. I wrote one to give him. My dear Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I found the courage to see you again. There are so many things I wish I could undo, but if I could go back, I'd still be your mother. Every single day, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones. I want you to know I never stopped loving you. I kept your room the same, your photos, your trophies. I wanted you to feel like home was still here, waiting. I'm not angry, Daniel. I'm proud, and I'm ready to start again, if you are. Love, always, Mom. When I finished writing, I folded the letter and placed it in my purse. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, thinking about what I'd say, how he'd look, whether he'd recognize me. By the time Saturday came, my hands were shaking as I got ready. I put on a soft blue dress, Mark's favorite, and a small silver locket with our family photo inside. Before I left, I stopped by the living room and looked at the picture of all 4 of us by the lake. We were laughing, the sun warm on our faces. I'm going to see him, Mark, I whispered. Wish me courage. Then I took a deep breath and left the house. The drive to the lake felt endless. The same winding road, the same tall trees swaying in the breeze. It looked the same, but I was different. My heart was racing. My palms were damp on the steering wheel. When I pulled into the parking lot, the clock on the dashboard read 2:57, 3 minutes early. I sat there for a moment, gripping the letter in my hand, staring out at the lake. The water shimmered softly under the afternoon sun, and for a moment, I could almost hear echoes of laughter from long ago. Then, I saw him. He was standing near the water's edge, hands in his pockets, head slightly bowed. Even from a distance, I knew it was Daniel. My breath caught in my throat. He was taller now, broader. His hair was shorter, his posture quieter, but it was him, my boy. I opened the car door slowly and stepped out. The gravel crunched under my shoes and he turned. Our eyes met. For a second, neither of us moved. And then, without thinking, I started walking toward him, one step then another, until we were face to face. He smiled, just barely, and his voice trembled when he said, "Hi, Mom." It was such a simple greeting, but it felt like a lifetime poured into 2 words. I wanted to say something, anything, but no words came out. I just reached up and touched his face gently, like I was afraid he'd disappear. And when I felt the warmth of his skin, the tears finally came. He pulled me into his arms, and for the first time in 20 years, I held my son again. We didn't speak for a long time. We didn't need to. Everything we had ever wanted to say was in that embrace. The apologies, the forgiveness, the years of love that had waited quietly for this moment. When we finally pulled apart, I gave him the letter I'd written. He smiled through tears. "You still write letters, huh?" I laughed softly. Some habits never fade. He looked out at the lake, his voice low. "Dad loved this place," I nodded. He did, and he'd be so happy to see this. We sat together on a bench by the water, the sunlight dancing on the surface like it used to when he was a boy. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt peace. We sat side by side on that old park bench, watching the ripples move gently across the lake. For a long time, neither of us spoke. There was no need to rush. Silence, for once, didn't feel like distance. It felt like understanding, like we were both remembering how to be near each other again. The air smelled faintly of pine and wet earth. Ducks drifted lazily on the water, and a few children's voices echoed faintly from the playground across the park. Laughter, the sound of innocence that once belonged to us. Daniel's voice was the first to break the quiet. "I almost didn't think you'd come." I turned to him, taking in his face, older, sharper, yet somehow still that little boy who used to chase dragonflies by this very lake. "I almost didn't," I admitted softly. "But then I remembered. I've waited too long not to." He smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "I didn't think I deserved this. Deserved you." "Oh, Daniel," I said, shaking my head gently. "There's nothing you could ever do that would make you undeserving of being my son." He swallowed hard, looking down at his hands. They were calloused, work-worn, the kind of hands that had built a life far from home. "I hurt you, Mom. I said things I can't take back. I thought I was standing up for myself, but I was just running away." I reached out and covered his hand with mine. "We all run, sweetheart, sometimes out of pride, sometimes out of pain. What matters is that you found your way back." He looked at me, eyes searching, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. "Do you forgive me?" The question hung in the air between us, fragile, trembling. I smiled through the tears threatening to fall again. "I forgave you long before you ever asked. I think I was just waiting for you to forgive yourself." He let out a shaky breath and nodded, as if something heavy had just lifted off his shoulders. We sat there in that quiet peace for a while, the years melting away with each shared glance, each unspoken word. "After some time," he said quietly, "I saw Emily before I came here. She was nervous to talk to me. I think she blames herself for not trying harder to bring us back together." I sighed softly. "She tried more than she'll ever admit. She came home often, you know. Every holiday, she'd ask if I wanted to reach out again. But I think we were both too afraid of being rejected." Daniel nodded. "She said that. Said she used to draft messages to me and then delete them. I guess stubbornness runs in the family." That made me laugh. "It does. But so does love." We watched the sunlight move slowly across the water. The breeze picked up, carrying with it the faint scent of wildflowers from the far end of the park. Then Daniel said something that made my heart clench. "I brought something." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. The edges were frayed, the colors faded, but I recognized it immediately. It was from one of our last family picnics. Mark was sitting on the blanket, grinning with his arm around me. Daniel was maybe 17 then, and Emily was laughing mid-bite, her face half hidden behind a sandwich. "I've kept it all these years," he said quietly. "Even when I was angry, I couldn't throw it away. I used to take it out whenever I felt lost." I traced the image with my fingertips, my chest tightening. "He'd be so proud of you, Daniel." "Of the man you've become," he shook his head. "I don't know about that." "I do," I said, meeting his eyes. "You came back. That takes more courage than you think." We sat there until the shadows began to stretch long across the ground. The afternoon sunlight had softened into gold, and the sound of the water lapping against the shore seemed to echo in the stillness. I found myself thinking of Mark, of how he would have smiled at this moment, of how he used to tell me, "Time doesn't heal everything, but love does." Maybe he was right. As the light began to fade, Daniel turned to me again. "Mom, would you come to dinner with me? Emily's waiting. She wanted to come here, but I told her I needed to see you first." My breath caught. "Emily's here?" He nodded, smiling a little. "Yeah. She said she'd wait at the little diner by the old bookstore, the one Dad used to take us to." My throat tightened with emotion. For years, I'd dreamed of this, both of my children in one place again, and now, somehow, it was happening. "I'd love to," I whispered. The walk back to the car felt lighter, somehow. The gravel didn't crunch as sharply. The air didn't sting as much. It felt as if the world itself was holding its breath, watching two souls find their way home. When we reached the diner, I could see her through the window, Emily sitting at a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. She looked up as we approached, her eyes widening when she saw me beside Daniel. The moment I stepped inside, she stood up, her chair scraping softly against the floor, and then she was in my arms before I could say a word. "Mom," she sobbed, holding on so tightly I could feel her heartbeat against mine. "You came." I stroked her hair, whispering, "Of course I did, sweetheart." "I'm so sorry it took me this long." Daniel stood nearby, watching with teary eyes. Then quietly he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around both of us. For the first time in decades, I was surrounded by my children, the very heartbeat of my life, and I felt whole again. Dinner that night wasn't fancy. Just simple comfort food, soup, bread, laughter between tears. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing, the little things we'd missed, the big things we'd survived. I learned that Daniel was married now, that he'd started his own small business. Emily was teaching part-time, still in the same town. They both had lives, successes, scars. And as they talked, I realized something. They had both become kind, strong, compassionate people, not despite what happened, but maybe because of it. We didn't talk much about the years apart. Not yet. That would come later. Tonight was for gentleness, for relearning the shape of our family. At one point, Daniel looked across the table and said softly, "You know, I thought about what you used to tell us. That family isn't about who's right. It's about who's willing to stay." I smiled, eyes wet. "And look at us. We stayed." He nodded, his hand reaching for mine across the table. "Yeah, Mom, we did." Later, as we stepped out into the night air, the sky was filled with stars. The three of us stood together for a moment outside the diner, none of us wanting to leave first. Emily looked at me with a shy smile. "You should come by the house tomorrow. I'll make breakfast. We can all start fresh." My heart swelled. "I'd love that," Daniel grinned, slipping his arm around his sister. "Just like old times, except now we're grown-ups who actually wash the dishes." We all laughed. And for a moment, it felt like the years hadn't passed at all. It felt like home. That night, when I finally returned to my quiet little house, I didn't feel the same loneliness that used to sit heavy in the air. The framed photo of our family on the wall didn't ache anymore. It glowed. I walked to my desk, where Daniel's letter still lay open, and beside it, I placed a new one. It was shorter than most, only a few lines, but it said everything my heart needed to say. Dear Mark, they're home. You can rest easy now. Love. Your wife? The morning after our reunion dinner felt like waking from a long, tender dream. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting my kitchen in a soft golden glow. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't hurt. It was a peaceful quiet, the kind that holds promise, not loneliness. I made a cup of coffee and sat by the window. Outside, the world was alive again. Birds sang on the telephone wires. A delivery truck rumbled past. Somewhere in the distance, I could almost hear the laughter from last night. My children's voices, grown but familiar, echoing in my memory. I thought of how simple it all was in the end. One letter, one act of courage. And suddenly, everything that felt broken began to heal. When I arrived at Emily's house later that morning, the smell of pancakes and maple syrup filled the air before I even reached the front porch. She opened the door with a grin, her hair still damp from a shower, wearing the same kind of cozy sweater she used to borrow from me as a teenager. "Good morning, Mom," she said softly, pulling me into a hug that felt warm and steady. Behind her, I could hear Daniel laughing. "Told you she'd come early," he called from the kitchen. I smiled. Old habits die hard. Emily led me inside. Her house was bright and lived in, little details everywhere that reminded me of our old home. Framed family photos, a stack of books by the couch, a vase of daisies on the table. It felt like love had finally found its way back into my life. Daniel flipped a pancake and looked over his shoulder. "Want some coffee, Mom?" "Only if you've improved since you were 17, I teased. He chuckled. "Guess you'll find out." We sat together at the breakfast table, me, my son, and my daughter. Something I once thought would never happen again. The sunlight poured in through the windows, catching the steam rising from our cups, the laughter between bites, the little moments that stitched our hearts together again. Emily handed me a small stack of letters tied with a ribbon. "I found these while cleaning last week," she said quietly. "Letters you sent years ago. I never had the courage to mail them to Daniel back then." I untied the ribbon slowly, fingers trembling a little. Each letter was written in my own handwriting, my words from a time when I was still aching, still hoping. "I kept writing even when I didn't know if he'd ever read them," I whispered. "It helped me keep a piece of him close." Daniel's voice was soft. "I wish I'd seen them sooner." "Maybe it wasn't time yet," I said gently. We had to find our way back the long way. After breakfast, we sat on the porch together, the three of us watching the world go by. A warm breeze rustled the trees, and for a long moment, none of us spoke. There was no need. Everything that needed saying had already been said, through tears, through silence, through the simple act of being there. Then Emily leaned her head on my shoulder. "You know," she said quietly, "Dad would have loved this. All of us together again." I smiled, looking out toward the horizon. "He's here, sweetheart. Just not the way he used to be." Daniel nodded. "I feel him too, especially when we laugh." As the day went on, we went through old photo albums, the kind with fading corners and handwritten notes under every picture. We laughed at old hairstyles, cringed at childhood fashion choices, and cried over the ones where Mark's smile still shone like sunlight through glass. Emily reached one particular photo, a Christmas picture from years ago. I was holding a tray of cookies, Daniel had his arm around Emily, and Mark was pretending to wear a Santa hat that was clearly too small. "That was the last Christmas before," she began, her voice faltering, "before everything fell apart." I touched the photo gently. "Before the silence," I said softly, "but not the love. That never went away." Later, Daniel helped fix a loose step on the porch while Emily made more tea. Watching them move around, bickering lightly, laughing, filled my chest with something I hadn't felt in so long. Contentment. It wasn't loud or grand. It was quiet, steady, and real. Daniel looked up at me while tightening a screw. "You know, Mom, I think Dad would be proud of you." I blinked back tears. "Oh, honey, I'm just glad you both gave me another chance." He shook his head, smiling. "You never lost your chance. We just had to find the road back to it." When the afternoon sun began to fade, I knew it was time to go. As I stood to leave, Emily handed me a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it when you get home," she said with a mischievous smile. Daniel gave me another hug, the kind that lasted long enough to feel like a lifetime folded into a single moment. "Don't disappear again, okay?" I laughed softly. Not a chance. That evening, back at my little house, I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window once more, the same spot where I had opened Daniel's letter just days before. Trembling, afraid, uncertain. Now, the fear was gone. I opened Emily's envelope and pulled out a piece of stationery covered in her neat handwriting. It said, "Mom, this is just to say thank you for never giving up on us, even when we gave up on ourselves. You taught us what love really means, not being perfect, but staying kind, even when it hurts. We love you. Emily and Daniel." I pressed the note to my heart and closed my eyes. For so many years, I had prayed for a moment like this. I thought it would come as a grand gesture, a sudden miracle. But it came quietly instead, like the first light of morning touching an old house after a long, dark night. The next morning, I took a walk down the quiet street behind my home. The air smelled like rain again, soft, familiar, forgiving. A neighbor waved. I waved back. Birds fluttered from tree to tree, and the world seemed somehow gentler than before. In my mind, I heard Mark's voice again, calm, steady, filled with that same wisdom I once took for granted. Time doesn't heal everything, but love does. And now I finally understood what he meant. Love doesn't erase the past. It redeems it. It doesn't fix every wound, but it gives us the courage to open our hearts again. That night, I wrote one last entry in my journal, a habit I'd kept since my children were young. Today, my family sat around the same table again. We laughed. We forgave. We began again. The letter that found its way to me was more than words on paper. It was a bridge built out of love, one I didn't realize could still stand after all this time. Maybe that's the thing about love. It never really leaves. It just waits for us to find our way home. I closed the journal and placed it on the shelf beside the photo of our family, the one Daniel carried all those years. As the house grew quiet, I whispered into the stillness, "Thank you, Mark. Thank you for believing that love would bring us back." Then, for the first time in a long, long while, I smiled, and it felt like peace.